a very warm welcome. Welcome to our first departmental seminar this Lent term. It's great so many of you joined us online today. Most of you, if not all, know Eva very well, but still a brief introduction is of course in order. Eva joined the department not too long ago in December 2020 as an LSE fellow. Before that, she worked at the University of Essex in the Institute for Social and Economic Research, and there she also completed her PhD in economics. As you might have guessed from her paper today, her research very much focuses on income inequality, on poverty. She is interested in the redistributive effects of benefit tax policies. Her research looks in depth at countries, but is also cross-national. How to say this? Well, it is a great pleasure to have her present her today, but I guess it's a even greater pleasure, quite possibly, that this seminar is also an occasion to congratulate her to her recent appointment as an assistant professor in the department. Her research is very exciting. If you're interested in whether an universal basic income would have been better than the furlough scheme, Eva's research is yours. So the department thought it is just too good to let her go. So and so she will stay with us. So my warmest congratulations in person now to you, Eva, not just online via email, even though we are still a bit online-ish in a Zoom room. And I think I speak for the entire department that we're really looking forward to working with you for longer. And warmest congratulations. But now, time to hand over to you and your paper, diving into SILC data and the dark forest of what to do with data that might not always be as good as one hoped, and what consequences it would have for your and others' research. The floor is yours.
Great, thanks very much, Timo, for the warm welcome, and thank you everybody for joining today's seminar. I'm really happy to be able to speak to you today. So I'll share my screen. Let me just make it full screen. I hope you can see that. Yep, great. So this is joint work with Chris Bollinger from the University of Kentucky. And in this paper, we examine income source confusion using the SILC survey data for Austria. So let me start with a bit of motivation and background. Household survey data on incomes are the main source for analysis of the income distribution. For example, they underpin official statistics on poverty and inequality, and also research on the income distribution, poverty, and so on. Household survey data are often collect income by source, for example, by asking specific questions about the individual's labor market earnings and social security benefit payments, such as for unemployment or old age. So then data users add up the incomes from these different sources to get total household income. So because of the relevance of these data, it's important to understand the types of error that respondents may do when they report their incomes in the data, and the implications for analysis. So for example, social security benefits are known to be underreported in survey data. And here's some example of papers confirming this for the US and also for the UK. So the issue is that if social security benefits are underreported, then we will not know what the poverty rate really is. But survey respondents may be confusing benefits with earnings, so they may be reporting benefits into earnings in the survey data. And we don't know if that's the case. And later on, I'll tell you some potential explanations for why this may occur. If so, total income may be better reported. So if people report benefits as earnings, their total income will still add up to the same, but income sources, the separate income sources, will be in the wrong category. And correctly identifying these separate income sources is important for many research questions. For example, examining the impact on earnings of program participation. To study errors in survey incomes, we need ideally linked survey and administrative data. And the administrative data are often assumed to include the true incomes. So there is a large body of literature that has looked at the errors in income separately in earnings or social security benefits. For example, these are some papers on the US looking at errors in earnings or state social security benefits or unemployment spells. This is a quite prominent paper looking at errors in earnings in Sweden. Another paper by Steven and Rio looking at errors in UK earnings or in state benefits. And recently, there have been also some research on Austria, so we are also looking at Austria. So this paper by Angel et al. Looks at the implications of errors in the survey income data for poverty measurement. Or the follow-up paper looks at the relationship between household and survey characteristics and response error. And in a separate piece of work, Fuchs et al. Show that take-up of social assistance is underestimated with the survey relative to the admin data. So there is a lot of literature written on these issues, but it's still rare to have linked survey and administrative data. And one reason is security issues. So governments are not willing to release that data to users. And it's especially rare to have such data for both different types of benefit and earnings, which we need to really study this benefit misreporting. So in our paper, we use the Austrian version of the European Union statistics on income and living conditions. So that's the SILC survey data. And the survey design of the SILC is used in many countries in Europe and also beyond Europe. So our paper has an appeal that goes beyond Austria, beyond the Austrian context or beyond the SILC. But what's special about the Austrian version of the SILC is that the survey data have been linked to administrative records, not only on state social security benefits, but also on earnings. And we also have longitudinal information, so we can see what happens to incomes over time, which we explore in part of our analysis. We study the three main unemployment programs in Austria, which are also recorded in the SILC. I'll tell you more about these programs in a moment. For now, what we need to know is that these programs are not mutually exclusive, and individuals can be on various benefit and earnings combinations. Our paper has two goals. So first, we assess the extent of misreporting across unemployment benefits and between benefits and earnings. And we document that many respondents fail to report participation in one or more of the unemployment programs. So that's consistent with literature, for example, in the US and the UK. In addition, we show that respondents seem to report one benefit as another, so they seem to report benefits in the wrong category. And respondents also seem to inflate earnings for periods when they are unemployed, but are actually receiving unemployment compensation. So that looks like respondents misreporting benefits as earnings. Then we examine the impact of this income source confusion for how much education or job training lead to higher earnings. This is just one example topic that we look at for which these errors will have important implications. And we find that estimates for the returns to education and training are substantially underestimated with the survey compared to the administrative data because of these errors. Why would respondents misreport their incomes in the survey? Respondents may make genuine reporting mistakes or errors, or they may deliberately misreport their incomes. So a reason for deliberate misreporting could be, for example, if some items are sensitive, like benefits targeted at low-income groups. So then respondents may want to conceal benefit receipts and report benefits as earnings. Genuine reporting errors can occur if, for example, program names are similar, so respondents are kind of confused about which program they are on. Also, confusion can occur if there are multiple conceptually related benefits, for example, benefits for disability or children. And this paper, looking at the UK, offers qualitative evidence supporting this, that respondents can be confused about the program they are on, so they report benefits in the wrong category. People may be also on various combinations of benefits and earnings receipts and only know their total income, or they may be conceptually thinking of benefits as earnings. Especially think here of social insurance benefits, which are typically linked to previous employment and earnings. And also survey design. So if you have a long questionnaire on income, on different income sources, respondents may find it quicker and easier to report different incomes as just a single income source. Why does misreporting matter? So even if the reported total household income, so that the sum of the reported income sources is accurate, it's still important that we capture correctly the separate income sources. If not, there are implications for analysis, as many researchers, analysts are interested in studying these separate income sources. And we will look at these implications later on. Okay, now on the unemployment benefits in Austria, there are three main programs also that are recorded in the SILC. The first one is the unemployment insurance benefit. I'll call that UI. I stands for insurance. The second one is the unemployment assistance, so UA, and the assistance for covering living costs, ACLC. All three benefits allow for limited labor market participation. So you can be earning a bit on the labor market while receiving unemployment compensation. UI, the unemployment insurance, is an insurance-based benefit, so kind of somewhat similar to the UK job seekers allowance. There is limited benefit duration and job training may be required while you are on it. The unemployment assistance, UA, covers low income groups and kicks in when UI is exhausted. And unlike unemployment insurance, people on unemployment assistance can be on very long spells on this benefit, and job training may be required. And finally, ACLC provides support for job training for low-income groups and can be received with UI or UA. So what I would like you to take away from this slide is that UI is the insurance-based benefit that's kind of the biggest unemployment program, while UA and ACLC are smaller programs and they target low-income groups. Okay, why would respondents confuse these programs? So here already I should know that in the paper, the data doesn't allow us to investigate these reasons. So it may be a mixture of things, but I think it's still helpful to kind of think of the potential explanations. So first we can rule out as a reason that program names are similar. In German, they're very, very different. But the benefits are conceptually similar, so they are all paid for unemployment and by the same labor market agency. Benefit amounts are also linked, so the unemployment assistance, UA, is paid as a fraction of UI, the unemployment insurance, and ACLC, that's the job training support, equals the shortfall of UI or UA to a certain minimum income threshold. Survey design, again, may make it quicker or easier for respondents to report everything as just a single benefit rather than into the individual categories. And also people may not know the individual benefit amounts, but rather know their total benefit income. Why would respondents report benefits as earnings? Well, one reason could be stigma about receiving benefits, in particular when it comes to the unemployment assistance and ACLC, the job training support, because these benefits are targeted at low-income families. So respondents may try to conceal receipts, deliberately misreport these benefits as earnings. Respondents may be also conceptually thinking of benefits as earnings. So UI and UA are both linked to previous earnings. And ACLC pays towards job training. And also all three benefits allow for limited labor market participation. So you can be earning from the labor market while receiving these benefits at the same time. And as with program confusion, survey design may make it quicker to report everything as earnings. So in the SILC questionnaire, the question on earnings comes first, and then there are questions on benefits. And also, as with program confusion, respondents may not know the individual amounts they get, but rather their total income. Now, moving on to the data. So we use the Austrian SILC for 2008 to 2011. And the SILC are widely used by social scientists and are the main source for official statistics on income, poverty, and inequality in Austria and also many other countries in Europe. The data on the incomes from the survey are annual and refer to the calendar years 2007 to 2010. The sample is based on private households registered in the Central Population Register. And this is a 4 years rotating panel, so we can look at what happens to people's incomes over time. And here we make use of the so-called additional data files. So these contain detailed survey data on earnings and state unemployment benefits, and also include linked administrative records on these incomes. So on this linkage between the survey and administrative records, from SILC 2012, to reduce the burden on survey respondents, information on earnings and some types of state benefit are acquired directly from administrative sources, so they're no longer asked from respondents. But to provide a continuous data series since 2008, so this was for the purpose of measuring Europe 2020 inclusion targets, Statistics Austria retrospectively matched the survey and administrative records for 2008 to 2011. So these are the data that we are using. And this match is based on so-called pseudonymized personal identifiers. So each identifier consists of 28 characters based on the person's name, date of birth, and sex. And they are available for nearly everybody in Austria. They are in each administrative data source and are also in the Central Population Register that is used for the SILC sampling frame. And identifiers were found for nearly everybody in the SILC sample, so almost 96% of the sample in 2008 to 99% in 2011. So linkage rate is really high. On the data on earnings and unemployment benefits, so for earnings, both the admin and survey data refer to annual gross earnings. So the administrative data comes from tax wage data that is electronically supplied by employers. And it refers to annual gross earnings. The survey data then asks respondents for their annual gross earnings in the previous calendar year. So the point here is that we have consistent concept. So we are comparing like with like. For the unemployment benefits, the administrative data is on annual gross benefit amounts. And the survey data asks respondents for their average monthly gross benefit amounts and the number of months they've been receiving each benefit for. So here we multiply amounts with duration to derive the annual benefit amounts, so that again, we are comparing consistent income concepts. And to reiterate, the reference period of both the admin and survey data is the same. It's the calendar year before the date of survey interview. So these are consistent concepts of income. Two issues that I kind of want to briefly talk about. So one question is, what if there is a mismatch of the survey and administrative data? So what if the administrative records on incomes for a particular person are matched to the wrong person in the survey? And these two papers on Sweden and by Stephen on the UK show that mismatch could be potentially a serious issue. But the Austrian system samples from an original frame which already has the identifier. And as I showed you in the previous slide, the linkage rates are also really high, so around more than 95%. And these linkage rates are typically tend to be higher than the linkage rates for many of the papers that I've cited here in the presentation. And also the matching procedure that has been used for the SILC is used also for a register-based census since 2011. So this procedure has been really tested and validated exactly to try and minimize this potential mismatching error. The other question is, well, what if there are under-the-table earnings that are in the survey, captured in the survey, but not covered in the administrative data? And again, these papers suggest that potentially this could be an issue. Now, for Austria, we don't know the extent to which under-the-table earnings are an issue, but we think that what is commonly thought of as under-the-table earnings issue, we show that this may be under-reporting benefits and reporting them as earnings in the Austrian case. And finally, just to note here that administrative records on benefits are overall thought to be accurate overall. Okay, I now just want to quickly tell you, kind of emphasize some key characteristics of the SILC sample. So this is a very big table. I'll really just highlight the main things. So first, the majority of people are with middle level of education. Men tend to be somewhat better educated than women. Men are also twice as likely to be in full-time, full-year employment compared to women. Around a fifth of the sample is reported to have taken job training, with 1.4% taking job training by the labor market agency. So that's the agency that administers the benefits. And then among the three benefits, UI, the unemployment insurance, is by far the biggest program. So around 5% of the sample report the benefits in the survey, more men than women. Then the unemployment assistance is reported by around 1.7%, and the ACLC, that's the job training support, by 0.7% of the sample. Okay, now moving on to the results. I just want to kind of highlight these key definitions of misreporting types that I will use for some of the results. So here we have a 2x2 table, so administrative receipt and no receipt, and here we have survey receipt and no receipt. So we get these four combinations: true negative, positive, false negative, and false positive. I would like you to kind of keep those in mind. Okay, so this is the first set of results. The key finding here is that unemployment benefits tend to be underreported in the survey data. So this is the false negative rate in percent. And what this means is that, for example, among UI recipients, according to the administrative data, which we consider to be the truth, 42% of those recipients do not report UI in the survey. And the false negative rate is even higher for the unemployment assistance benefit. It's 52% and 76% for the job training support ACLC. So clearly, underreporting is a huge issue in the survey. If we look at the total, so that's taking all three benefits together, the false negative rate is actually somewhat lower, it's around 38%. So already this suggests that people may be reporting one benefit in the wrong benefit category. Here, let's look at the false positive rate, again in percent. So it's less than 1% for all benefits. So what does this mean? For example, of all non-recipients, according to the administrative data, 0.8% falsely report UI in the survey. So in percent, these rates are low because the denominator is so big, it includes all non-recipients. But if we look at the number of cases, these are actually relatively large. So there is misreporting going on, but by far the biggest issue is really underreporting of benefits. And now in this slide, kind of the key finding here is that these false negatives are predominantly seem to be benefits being reported as earnings. And we also this table also indicates that there may be program confusion. So the table shows you combinations of survey benefit and earnings receipt given administrative receipt. For example, if we look at the first row, so of UI only recipients according to the administrative data, so the admin data we assume that contains true incomes, only 38% correctly report UI only in the survey. But for example, 11% report instead earnings only in the survey. So they fail to report UI, report earnings. So this diagonal in gray contains the true positive rates. Ideally, these would be equal to 100, but we see that they aren't. And these remaining cells indicate income misreporting. And I've highlighted in pink rates higher than 10%. The dots here are missing because cases are very small, so we can't disclose those. So the main column of interest is the fourth column here, earnings only in the survey. And that indicates that suggests that benefits are being reported as earnings. So for example, 38% of UI plus earnings recipients, according to the admin data, only report earnings. Or similarly, 27% of UA and earnings recipients only report earnings. So they fail to report benefits. The table also indicates program confusion. So here, for example, 11% of UA only, so that's unemployment assistance recipients, report the unemployment insurance instead. Or here, 29% of UI, UA, and earnings recipients report UI and earnings, so they fail to report the unemployment assistance. Okay, these are cross tabulations. Now, to try and understand better these issues, we estimate linear probability models. So what we do here is we take everybody who has receipts of UI, of the unemployment insurance benefit in the administrative data, so these are our true incomes, and we look at what's the probability of reporting UI in the survey. And the first key finding is that, so if we look at the second column here, we include additional controls for individual and household characteristics. So the first key finding is that the more respondents overstate their earnings in the survey relative to the admin data, the less likely it is that they report UI. So respondents report extra earnings instead of reporting UI receipts in the survey, which is consistent with reporting UI as earnings. On the other hand, if we look at the false positive in earnings relative to a true negative, that has a positive effect, so increases the likelihood of reporting UI in the survey. And one explanation here could be that people are thinking of UI as earnings. So when they're asked first in the survey about their earnings, they report UI there. And then when they're asked about their benefits, they report UI again without correcting their earlier reports. There's also evidence suggesting program confusion. So false positive in UA, the unemployment assistance, lowers the likelihood of reporting UI in the survey. So kind of suggesting people are perhaps confusing the unemployment insurance for unemployment assistance benefit. And this coefficient for false positive in ACLC is positive, but is small and imprecisely estimated. So we repeat the same analysis now for the unemployment assistance. So we take everybody in the admin data with UA receipt, and we look at what's the probability to report that benefit in the survey. And again, we see that the more earnings are overstated in the survey relative to the admin data, the less likely to report the benefits in the survey. And also a false positive in earnings here relative to a true negative also lowers the likelihood of reporting unemployment assistance in the survey. Now, the reasons for this, why, if this is indeed people reporting the benefit as earnings, reasons for this could be stigma or thinking of the benefit as earnings or knowing your overall total income. We see again some evidence suggesting program confusion. So a false positive in UI in the unemployment insurance benefit lowers the likelihood of reporting the unemployment assistance. But note here that this coefficient of minus 0.31 is more negative than the coefficient in the previous table for the UA false positive of minus 0.145. So what this means is that it looks like respondents are more likely to confuse the unemployment assistance for the unemployment insurance benefit than the other way around. And we think this is not surprising given that the unemployment assistance is paid after UI, the unemployment insurance, is exhausted. So we think that that kind of makes sense. Okay. So far, I've shown you results for misreporting in benefit receipt. So that's the extensive margin. I will not show you more results, but in the paper, we also look at misreporting in the amount of benefits and earnings, so at the intensive margin. And we find that on average, people do make mistakes in the amount they report for different income sources. But the error in total income, so if you add up all these different sources to get total household income, so the error in total income is smaller. So again, this kind of suggests that respondents seem to be putting benefits and earnings together. So they seem to know their overall income better than the amounts by income source. Let me summarize the results so far, first on benefit underreporting and program confusion. So we find large underreporting of unemployment benefits in the survey, 42% of UI, 52% of UA, and 76% of the job training support program. So recipients do not report benefits in the survey. And we find evidence suggesting program confusion between UI, the unemployment insurance, and unemployment assistance. So falsely reporting receipt of UI lowers probability of reporting UA and the other way around. I forgot to note that I did not show you kind of linear probability models estimated for ACLC because sample size is small for that benefit, but we don't find anything which rejects the findings so far. On reporting benefits as earnings, we show that a large share of respondents report earnings only while receiving unemployment compensation. So, for example, 27% of UA and earnings and 23% of UI, UA, and earnings recipients report earnings only in the survey. And over-reporting earnings in the survey compared to the admin data lowers the probability to report UI and UA. So it's kind of all consistent with this. And respondents, I didn't show you results for that, but we also find that respondents make mistakes in the amount of the separate income sources, but the error in total income is smaller, so they seem to know their total income better. Okay, so for the rest of the presentation, I'm going to show you results for the implications of benefit misreporting. The starting point here is that there has been long-term interest of researchers and policymakers in understanding the returns to education and the efficacy of tying unemployment programs to job training. So we demonstrate the impact of benefit misreporting on the extent to which education and job training lead to higher earnings. And we do that by estimating earnings regressions as is typically done in the literature. In our first application, we look at the returns to education. So the motivation here is unemployment is negatively associated with education. So we ask, would reporting of unemployment benefits as earnings bias the estimated returns to education? And we have two samples. Both consist of full-time workers, including those who are unemployed, but who would have worked the full year otherwise. And in the first sample, we use the survey measures of earnings and benefits to define the sample. In the second sample, we use the administrative measures to define the sample. And we estimate earnings regressions based on the survey versus administrative earnings, controlling for the level of education. First, I just want to show you quickly the education shares by unemployment benefit status. And the key finding here is that both men and women benefit recipients tend to be less educated than non-recipients. So there is higher proportion of low educated and fewer high educated recipients than non-recipients. So this confirms that unemployment is concentrated among lower educated workers. And as I showed you previously, we show evidence that benefits are misreported as earnings. So this should lead, therefore, that lower educated workers inflate their earnings. So what are the implications of that? And here are our results from the earnings regressions. So these are results for men and women separately with the survey and administrative data. So looking first, for example, at men in the survey data, we find that middle-educated men relative to low-educated men have around 29% higher earnings. High-educated men relative to low-educated men have around 56% higher earnings. But if we compare this with the administrative data, we see that there is a higher gradient in the administrative data. And we see a similar pattern for women. So with the administrative data, we get our estimates for the returns to education are higher than with the survey. So the survey data seems to underestimate the returns to education because of the errors. In our second application, we look at the returns to job training. Unemployment programs are often tied to job training as part of what's often called active labor market policies. And the goal is that job training should improve workers' chances to re-enter the labor market and improve their earnings. So our outcome variables here are earnings and being an earner in T+1. That's the year after receiving training in T. And again, we have two samples. Both consist of those with unemployment benefits or who report being unemployed for at least 1 month in year T. And in the first sample, we use the survey benefits to determine who is unemployed, and survey earnings is the outcome variable. In the second sample, we use the admin measures. And again, we estimate earnings regressions based on the survey versus administrative earnings or being an earner in T+1 with indicators for job training in T, the year before. These are the results for the earnings regression. So the outcome variable is earnings here. And again, we have results with the survey and administrative data. So with the survey, we get that the job training by the labor market agency, so this is the agency that administers the unemployment benefits. So it is the coefficient of the main policy relevance. So training by the Labour Market Agency leads to 13.3% higher earnings. But with the admin data, the effect is almost 23%, so much higher. What does explain this difference? And the key result here is if we look at the sample. So with the survey data, we get around 1,000 observations, 1,000 cases. With administrative data, we get 1,400. And the reason for this is that in the survey, unemployment benefits are underreported. So we miss around a third of the potential sample, we miss it in the survey. They're not captured in the survey. These are the results for being an earner. And again, if we look at the training by the Labour Market Agency, that improves the probability of being an earner the year after taking the training by 2.9% versus 5.7% with administrative data. And again, it is the difference in the sample. So with the survey data, we have a much smaller sample than with administrative data due to unemployment benefits being underreported in the survey. And that's what explains the difference in the returns. Okay, so let me conclude. We document that all three unemployment programs are underreported in the survey. So this is consistent with also other existing literature. In addition, we show that survey respondents seem to report one benefit as another. And the main kind of result here is that, in particular, the unemployment assistance is associated with false positives for the unemployment insurance. That's the main program. We also find evidence that suggests respondents may be reporting benefits as earnings. Earnings reports are higher compared to the earnings reports in the survey are higher compared to the administrative data when any of the three programs are underreported. Misreporting in the unemployment programs has implications that go far beyond simply the measurement of unemployment. Misreporting is likely to impact studies through both mismeasured earnings and the construction of samples. And we try and demonstrate that by estimating earnings regressions and by looking at the returns to education and job training. And we show that the interactions between unemployment benefits and any variable or sample construction can be of significant concern. And the potential explanations for benefit misreporting, like benefit stigma, thinking of benefits as earnings, knowing your total income better than the separate income components, all these go beyond the Austrian SILC and the Austrian context. So we hope that our paper has an appeal that go beyond Austrian SILC in context. Okay, this is all. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Eva. Before opening the floor, a brief technical announcement, also giving you a few more moments to think about the first questions. You will have seen possibly on the website that we were scheduled to be online all the way through until reading week. The school has advised that we are now allowed to return to in-person presentations. So we were I was just told in the green room before the seminar. So we are assuming to return into the web room for those who want to come, but obviously speakers in the next few weeks might have made arrangement that might not allow them to speak in person. So to avoid place confusion, do watch out. So there will be a correspondence newsletters telling us whether there will be hybrid or the speaker will be there or not. But in any case, people will be allowed back into the social policy meeting room, formerly known as the web room. So that's a brief technical update on how we will proceed. But now, please, the floor is open to the audience. Any questions, so please do raise your hand, your virtual hand. Isabel.
Thanks, Eva. That was a fascinating presentation. And one that sort of brought to mind experiences I've had on former projects of interviewing people who are in receipt of various different benefits. And in reflecting on your thoughts with respect to why unemployment benefits are underreported or they're confused with earnings, I suppose my reflection on that is you know, so your interests are, you know, what this means for us as data analysts in terms of the unreliability of that data. But I think for anybody who's had to navigate the benefit system, I mean, it's really indicative of the level of categorical complexity, administrative complexity that, you know, not only people who are lower educated, but I have to say people who are quite highly educated find difficult to navigate. So I would add, I'd find it remarkable if any survey data presents a reliable picture, to be quite frank, because it's just, you know, so there's the kind of categorical complexity in terms of what type of benefit you're applying for, what you're eligible for, so the eligibility criteria and how that constantly changes. Then you've got sort of added complexity that, you know, on the one hand, so, you know, how do people differentiate between benefits, income, earnings? So on the one hand, they're told to include benefits in terms of their income, but then, you know, you're separating out earnings from income. I mean, I suppose my reflection is, you know, and I'd be interested to see what you think, that, you know, whether it is actually at all possible to get reliable data in this respect.
I suggest adding Berkay and then back to Eva, so that we have two questions, and then back to you.
Sure.
Thank you, Eva. That was a great presentation. I have a very basic question. So I was wondering whether you wanted to look at the profiles of these people, like Isabel mentioned about high educated, low educated, or so on. But the particular profile I'm interested in your case is the about 15% self-employed in Austria. So the self-employed people are eligible on voluntary basis to unemployment insurance in most countries. I don't know whether that's the case in Austria, and then that's where most of the earnings, recording the earnings problems are arising. So I was wondering whether you could identify the population subgroups where these missing bits are particularly interested in predicting some profiles of these people who are these misreporters. Yeah.
Right. Can I answer the questions? Yeah, great. So starting with Isabel, thanks very much, Isabel. I'll be really curious to speak to you and find out about your previous work on that. So my kind of views on that, whether we can get accurate data, I think what we are trying really to show in this paper is to kind of take a step back and first try to establish what are the potential problems with the data, what are the types of error. And I think that what we try to add compared to other literature is really kind of show more, to a large extent, whether there are problems exactly in terms of misreporting one benefit as another or between benefits and earnings, because I think that hasn't been yet documented, and I think there is still a lot that we need to understand about the types of error that respondents do in the survey. So I think that's the first step, kind of try and establish what are the errors do, and then we could start and think about, well, can we do something about this? Can we actually somehow reduce these errors in the data? But I think that's a further step that we'll need to take with that research. One thing to note is that there are some interesting results we see from the data, which I didn't really present, but things like, for example, Women seem to be, I think that's also confirmed in other studies, but women seem to be somewhat better on average in reporting their incomes than men. Later in the interview year, respondents are interviewed, so the bigger the gap between the interview and the income reference period, also the more likely people seem to make mistakes. So one implication of that for data producers could be to kind of squeeze potentially the interview period to follow very closely after the income reference period. But I think we need perhaps more research on that to really be able also to devise some recommendations for data users and producers. So I hope that that kind of answers your thoughts, but I'll be really happy to speak to you more about this. And Berkay, on your question, so one thing to note is that the earnings that we have in the data, which have been linked to the administrative data, these are only for employed, so employment earnings. We don't have administrative data on self-employed earnings, and that's part of the reason why we haven't looked at those. But in the paper, we look in particular at, for example, what household or individual characteristics are linked with response errors. And actually, by education, we don't really find that much difference. So it doesn't seem to be that. It doesn't seem to be really that higher educated people are much better at reporting their incomes than lower educated people. We also looked at, for example, country of birth. That doesn't seem to make also much difference, or by different occupations. Again, we don't really see much gradient. But yeah, looking at different groups, that's definitely important. And one of the papers that I cited by Angel et al., they really focus in particular on that, on the relationship between household and survey characteristics and response error, which I think is really important.
Thomas.
Was that my name? Okay. Aiva, thank you for your talk and for your diligent work on this. The thing that I was thinking about is that, like, it seems like what you're finding is dismissing one suspicion right out that is usually voiced in this in a kind of misreporting of earnings, is that people would underreport their earnings in order to still be eligible for benefits. Right? This doesn't seem to be the case at all in your data, because if anything, then they are kind of reporting too high earnings, so they would risk. I mean, of course, survey data is not used for determining whether people can get benefits, but still, you would think that they might have some kind of trepidations about over-reporting their income and then not receiving their benefits anymore. So my question would be, does it seem like the earnings that people report would actually, in fact, put them out of eligibility for benefits?
Right. Okay. Yeah, no, that's a great question. So yeah, I think just important to establish that, yes, people may be still underreporting their earnings to, say, benefit authorities to get their benefits. They don't need to underreport their earnings in the survey data, right? So they're kind of two different things. But I can understand that one reason why people may want to still misreport their earnings, if, as you say, they are kind of worried that the data producers will share the data with, say, benefit or tax authorities. So I don't really know, actually, in the context of Austria, how much that's a concern. But that definitely would be interesting to research. So we haven't looked. So I guess your question is what happens to our estimates of take-up, of benefit take-up? Is that kind of the idea you're?
No, it would be just interesting in this context. I mean, I agree that obviously surveys don't really determine whether people get benefits, but I would expect that people at least try to be consistent in what they're reporting to kind of to the EU SILC as to what they're reporting to kind of benefit agencies. But it would just be interesting if what they are reporting now to EU SILC would actually be an amount of earnings that would mean that they shouldn't get any benefits anymore. It would just be another nail in the coffin of this assumption that people cheat on these on what they report in order to remain eligible for benefits.
Right.
Because I mean, coming back to sorry that I'm talking so much.
No,
coming back to Isabel's point, it would be a hint at the fact that people they don't even know how much, you know, like where these benchmarks are, and they're just, you know, reporting whatever they can, and to have the suspicion that they have this calculation of, okay, I'm reporting this and that much so that I can still get benefits. That seems to
right.
Yeah.
So I think maybe something that goes in the direction of what you're saying is this other paper that I mentioned by Fuchs et al. I think that's in Social Policy and Administration, and they actually try to identify indeed who is eligible according to the survey data to receive some benefits and who takes up those benefits, and do that also with the administrative data. And what they find, I think, is the opposite of what you're saying. So I think what they find is that the take-up of social assistance seems to be underestimated with the survey compared to the administrative data. But yeah, I'll have a look again at the paper and maybe speak to you about this. Great, thanks. Kitty?
Kitty, sorry.
Thanks, Eva. Really, really interesting and sobering for those of us who use survey data. Just to pick up on Thomas's point, I would have thought this maybe tells us, firstly, that people realise this isn't linked to the benefit system, and so they're not worried about reporting. And also maybe it tells us something about social desirability bias. People would rather say that they're earning more than they are, and they're less happy to report that they're receiving means tested benefits. But I wanted to ask you about sort of what you thought about the generalizability of this from Austria. So you said a little bit about that, whether this isn't just about Austria, it's telling us something broader. But so for example, if I was going to study the impact of employment programme on becoming an earner in the UK with using survey data, would you say don't do it, or or would you say sure, but just be, so maybe you can use what you find is going to be a lower bound estimate, and it's probably going to be higher on the basis of the Austrian findings, or would you say you just can't say anything about that for the UK?
Right. Oh, that's a very big, a very big question, and I think it kind of goes also in the direction of what Isabel says. I guess what's the implications of our work for maybe data producers, data users? I think really probably we need to think more about this. But one thing to highlight is that I think the UK collects data on current incomes, while the SILC collects data on annual incomes from the previous calendar year. So it may be that with current incomes, people make less mistakes because there are no issues like recall bias, not remembering exactly what you've been on, what benefits, what programs you've been on. So it could be that, with current incomes, there is less scope for confusion. There may be still stigma. So social desirability, I guess, that wouldn't necessarily go away whether you measure current or annual incomes, but at least kind of genuine reporting errors, some of those may be less with the UK data. But that's something to explore further, I think. Sorry if this is not a very satisfying answer.
No, it's a really good point. But you're just going to have to go on and do it for the UK as well now, aren't you? Next step, next paper.
Right. Yeah, I would love that. Yeah.
Lucinda.
Thanks. Yes. Yeah. Really interesting. So I've been thinking about this, and I've been thinking about whether there's any chance that the survey data is more accurate in some ways than it looks. And I'm sure you've thought about this a lot. But I was just wondering about earnings disregards. Yeah. I mean, when I used to sign on, or many years ago, it was really hard. Declaring earnings and still claiming benefit. It was just some of the complications that Isabel's mentioned, I think, but they were kind of, in principle, there was a possibility. So is there any chance that people actually are getting some earnings at least, and that these are not being measured well by the administrative data, because the systems aren't very good at capturing earnings disregards? Or is that just a hopeless suggestion?
No, I think we definitely cannot rule out that the survey data may be capturing something that the administrative data is not able to capture, like under the table earnings as well. So we really don't know the extent of that issue in the Austrian case, and it's really hard to measure that. So we are definitely not ruling that out. It's just that the findings that we find suggest that an important issue is potentially reporting benefits as earnings, but it doesn't mean that we should be disregarding the survey data altogether. Well, one thing to say in the Austrian case is that from SILC 2012, they no longer ask earnings data from survey respondents, so the data really comes only from the administrative source. So it's no longer, apart from those that data that we have, it's no longer possible to really study those issues with further waves. But potentially with data sets for other countries, I think this will be definitely really important to study. And one other thing to say is that also for lots of different analyses, we need rich information on survey and on individual and household characteristics, which survey data record really well, administrative data do not. So I think that there is a lot of value of having survey data, and I hope that this paper will kind of help us to really understand a bit better the errors in the survey data, and hopefully we can learn also about how in the future, maybe how to reduce those errors.
If there isn't a question, I have one or more a comment, and it also, I guess, relates to Isabel's point of difficulty understanding tax systems and benefits. And I wondered whether that's possibly it's, I think, very UK specific, whether studying the high income child benefit tax charge, I guess the long name already indicates it's kind of a complicated beast, could be quite informative in understanding how difficult it is actually to navigate taxes and benefit and understand what one is entitled to. And I guess with that tax charge, kind of the clawing back of money you weren't supposed to get, that is probably quite a painful and administratively not the easiest of process. So I guess if somebody had a very good understanding of their taxes and entitlements, and presumably those who have to pay them are in comfortable socioeconomic positions because they pay very high taxes, so to pay those charges, well, that could maybe provide intriguing insights. That's saying as somebody who doesn't really know much about income reporting and alike, but so kind of intuitively that came to my mind thinking about complication, and that would be a population one would possibly typically assume to be better informed because they are on high incomes.
So Timo, can I just check I understand the question? The question is whether higher income individuals or families are better at reporting their incomes. Is that?
No, my Berke has a finger semi up if you want to jump in. But for me, the issue was the high income child benefit tax charge. I mean, the issue is how difficult is it to navigate a tax and benefit system. And when and some of the question pointed to whether it is more difficult for low-income families, and then Isabel indicated Lucinda is probably difficult for everybody. The child benefit tax charge might be intriguing because as a well-informed taxpayer recipients, you would possibly want to avoid getting into that, because it's quite a peter to receive, then to pay back, to calculate. This particular set of people in the tax and benefits system, whether they would provide a better or good understanding of the difficulties, because they are a particular group which you would normally assume to know their stuff reasonably well, because they are on, by definition, they pay the highest tax rate.
Right.
But Berke too had his hand up in this very context, and then Grace also after him, and then back to you, Eva. If Grace is also related to the child benefit tax charge, if it's a new issue, then maybe we move to it then afterwards.
Yep.
Okay.
Sorry for the second round. I'm happy to give my turn to Grace. I just thought that there was an income question. I'm super curious about one quick thing. So, you know, in most of the income surveys that I have worked with, I haven't worked with EU SILC before, there's this question that comes like, what's your main job? And then what's your second job? What's your third job? And then the respondent really decides about what is meant by the main job and what's meant by the second job. And then you can see a lot of shifts in this. And then people ask about what's the income that you earn in your main job? What's the income that you earn from your second job up to your third job? And in the survey data, you like which job that you take into account when you calculate the earnings in the, and I was wondering whether is the confusion because like many people do have small second jobs and third jobs that are supplementary incomes, and I was wondering about that. Yeah.
Grace, is yours on the child benefit stuff?
No.
Then maybe give a chance to Eva, and then over to you, so that we don't have too much piled up for Eva.
Yep, sure. I'll start quickly with Berkay's question. So the survey data does ask about your annual gross earnings from different jobs, and also for just your total annual gross earnings. So we use the total. So the earnings from all jobs, and the administrative data captures the same. So I hope, well, we can't really investigate that, but it should be that we are comparing consistent concepts with the two data sets, both from the survey and administrative data. One thing we haven't looked at is indeed how, for example, having more than one job in the previous calendar year, how does that affect response error? And perhaps we can look at that in greater detail. But yeah, I guess that's really important. Thanks. And about Timo's question. So, Timo, I'm not really sure that there is such a benefit or tax charge in Austria. But one thing we show when we estimate those linear probability models is that the higher your administrative earnings, the less likely respondents are to report benefits in the survey. So why is that? Well, we don't know whether it is again because whether that's linked because people with high earnings just have smaller benefit amounts, and having smaller benefit amounts also kind of reduces the likelihood of reporting the benefit in the survey. But as I mentioned also before, so we looked at education gradient, and that doesn't seem to matter much for response errors. So it's not that people who are higher educated seem to be making much fewer mistakes than lower educated families. That's what I can say. And of course, the data doesn't really allow us to kind of understand how much people are aware of the different benefits or tax systems. But one of the papers we cited, that's a really interesting paper on the UK, where the authors have carried out focus groups with respondents, I think, in the family resources survey. And they do indeed confirm that people are confused. That there are so many benefits, especially in the UK context, so many different benefits for disability or children, that people are just not sure which program they are on. And I guess that's what also Isabel was saying earlier.
I would be very surprised if the Austrian had anything that vaguely resembles this particular charge. I think the Austrians are far too sensible to have come up with that rather bizarre instrument. But Grace, now please, your turn.
Yes, thank you.
Brilliant.
Sorry, I only have a really simple question, but thanks so much, Eva, for the presentation. It's so interesting. And I'm quite taken by the suggestion that people are confused when they report their benefits, because I think that's happened with a lot of my friends as well. So I can imagine that happening. But what I wanted to ask was, do you have information on when people started being on the benefit system? Because I thought maybe the longer you have been on the benefits system, then maybe you might automatically start thinking of it as your earnings, and then therefore you start reporting it as your earnings. And also because you said people tended to report the wrong, that they were on unemployment insurance rather than assistance because it came after or something like that. So I wondered if time period really mattered in how people then thought of their income as a whole, I guess, when they're reporting it. Thanks.
Thank you. That's a really good question. So in the data, we don't know when people enter, when they start being on the program, or when they exit the program, but we have information on benefit duration and also for how many months in the past calendar year they've been on that program. We have that information both in the administrative and the survey data, and we also have the same for earnings. So actually in a follow-up paper, that is something that we want to investigate further. So what are the types of error that respondents do when they report, for example, unemployment spells or spells of earnings. So that's a really, and your idea to look at how, whether you've been long on a certain benefit, how does that affect response error? That's a really interesting idea. So we will definitely look into that. Thank you.
If there are, we have probably time for 2 more questions or so. So Elizabeth, like in the pub. Wait, last call. Isabel, a real hand. Yes, please.
I'm just picking up on one of the points made in the chat about people being informal workers. So the references to the informal economy in India, but I think it's an interesting and important point to consider in the UK country context, where, and it also picks up on the point made by Berkay about people having multiple jobs, and they also might have multiple jobs that include informal jobs, and to the extent to which that gets, and not just informal jobs in terms of whether they report those earnings or not, but those earnings may be extremely variable. So
Right.
People don't necessarily know what they earn from week to week. And I think the sort of complexities in relation to the labour market alongside the benefit system are such that, you know, people might be on the one hand self-employed, or they're not actually self-employed, but they're employed via an agency, which means they're not an employee. I mean, it's all really difficult for people to navigate, and I think actually have an accurate picture about what their earnings, income, benefits, and so on are. Anyway,
Yeah.
Interesting.
Thanks for that. Well, one thing to note is that I think both, so I'll come back to the case of India, but just thinking about the UK and Austria is that I think both, for example, the Family Resources Survey and the SILC data ask for, how is it called? The payslip. Ask for people to use their payslip. And I guess using the payslip, if you have one, improves the accuracy of earnings reports. Unfortunately, in the SILC, we don't have those variables to kind of to look at to see if indeed people who use pay slips when they report their earnings, do they make fewer response errors or not. But that, I guess, could help with kind of accurately reporting your incomes. The case of India seems really interesting. Thanks for that. Thanks for that question. So I think that really just highlights that in some contexts, there are a lot of impracticalities of using administrative data, especially on earnings, if that data potentially could not capture a really substantial source of income that people receive. So again, it's kind of, I think, emphasizing the value of survey data, that we do need survey data. We need to be, to better understand the errors in that data so that we can also work to reduce those. But I think perhaps there are a lot of merits in using administrative benefits data, because at least that data, if there aren't any mismatch issues, so issues when linking the administrative with survey data, I think we could perhaps be quite confident that the benefits data from administrative sources do capture the truth. That may be something to kind of, for data producers to consider by, for example, replacing survey reports on benefits with administrative data sources, so they also reduce the burden on respondents and potentially improve their other reports. I hope this answers the question. And I can see Kitty wrote something in the chat.
Yeah,
Thanks,
and
Kitty.
we have one more hand. Snikda, I hope I pronounce it correctly. If not, please tell us how I should have done.
Hello, yeah, it's correct.
Okay,
Thank
good.
you.
I thought the hesitance meant it was utterly wrong that you didn't even recognize your name. I'm relieved.
Do you want to ask a question, or sorry, you're muted, so I can't hear you. Singda?
Did the hand go up by
Perhaps not.
accident?
Perhaps
Or do you have a question?
That's all right. It's fine.
Hello? Okay, probably accident. A few more moments, nothing coming, and she's probably gone. But we are coming towards the end in any case. So thank you very much, Eva, for your presentation. And it almost looked like as if with Isabel's comments and in tweet comments and your responses, there might even be a future departmental new research project coming soon on navigating the benefit system quant kisses qual or something like that. Anyway, thank you very much. Sorry, I just had to say something. It was great that you kicked off our seminar series this term. Take care until next week, and winke winke. Bye for now.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks a lot for the great questions. Bye.